Japanese swords have inspired me in such a huge way. Typically, most of the bigger families that could afford these swords, not just the samurai, but daimyo and stuff like that, curators of communities, higher up the food chain, I'd imagine that these guys collected swords just like we do today, and it was just exquisite because everybody in their own right, between the smithies that made the blades, between the guys who made fittings, the artwork was impeccable. I've seen coatings and the combination of gold and what's called shakudo, which is a black finish. I call it equivalent to our DLC today. And it's like, how does this even happen, across these materials? Some of these things just fall into my lap sometimes. Sometimes, like I said, I typically never really go shopping for any of this stuff. If I'm in Japan, I'm definitely gonna stop at the sword shops and go talk to some of the sword polishers. My dream is to get a daisho commissioned sometime before I turn 60. So I'm going to be working with my very, very good friend, Mike Yamasaki, to get that done. He's the only person I would trust to do that sort of work anyway. The Japanese swords are polished on stones, a series of stones throughout its process. It's not only just stones, but finger stones, and also powders and some other little tricks. The polishers have developed techniques that are just beyond my comprehension. We use some of it still today. But I've learned probably more about the sword from polishers than I have from sword makers. So it's been a very, very interesting mix of technologies. Show you something interesting is I have a daisho that was made between Yoshindo and his son, where Yoshindo made the katana. Beautiful piece. The hamon on this here, if you can catch it right in the light, just looks like fire. The wakizashi, made by his late son. Part of that daisho is also a small kozuka knife, made also by Yoshindo's late son. I do collect a certain type of modern maker, which would be Gendaido, anything from the 40s on forward. A lot of the pieces within my collection are antiques. Some of them, I don't know what you consider old. I think the earliest piece I have is from the 13th century. A lot of collectors out there have stuff that's much older, but I gravitate towards the pieces that I really enjoy, and plus the maker. If I've studied the maker back in the past, the style or the shape of the blade or the finishes, that's typically where I've gravitated. So, on this column here, you're going to go ahead and see some Tadayoshi blade. I have a couple from, later in the 17th, 18th century. It's a very, very big blade, and very nicely done though. So Tadayoshi, one of the first Tadayoshis I got, was from a sword polisher, Pat Giacobbe, out of Florida. I was after this blade for as long as I could remember, and then I finally convinced him to sell it to me. But has a dual dragon horimono, and it's just flawless. This one also is in full koshirai. Very sexy piece. One particular piece that I really particularly enjoy, this is a first gen Tadayoshi, probably around, if I remember correctly, the 1650s, in pristine condition. Very simplistic. It's not very flamboyant, but what's really beautiful about this piece is this is inscribed in gold. It is a two-body test-cut Tadayoshi blade from the 1650s in pristine condition. This was a gift for my birthday a few years back from my brother Sebastian Berengi. That's the finest gift I've ever, probably will ever receive. Typical test cut blades were inlaid in gold. That was a common thing back in the day. You know, whether they, cut corpses or went to the prisons, those guys, unfortunately, if they were put to death, they were cut by these guys. There were swordsmen that were specific about this, and if the test was successful, they would, of course, inscribe some of the information on the tang, and it was already be inlaid in gold. The Japanese didn't invent steel, but they certainly took it to the next level. These are tamahagane steel. They're very, very heavy. It's the iron ore, a very, very refined virgin iron ore that's made in I forget the province in Japan where they actually still do this. But these are the ingots that the swordsmiths would purchase. Still heavily regulated, it seems like, and some of the makers make them themselves. But the tamahagane iron, to make the blades, they would get it in this form here, of course, heat these up, I'm going to do this very rudimentarily, heat these up, hammer them flat, and then water quench them. So what they would do is they would get a series of these and do that same process where they'd hammer them flat, and while they're still at critical, quench them in water. And then the smith would go by the plates or the pieces, smack them with his forging hammer, break them up into smaller pieces. He could find the ones that had a higher carbon content or mid carbon content or low carbon content. They could test them, they can rasp them or whatever with a file or however they would do it. And that's how they would separate the higher carbon and lower carbon pieces to make the edge quality or to make the sides or to make the cores or spines. So that's how, because you'd often wonder, well, how do they know? Well, you'd have to get the higher carbon content. If it was super, super, super hard and it would shatter like glass, that's going to be the stuff that you would use hagane for the edge proportions, shingani for the sides or the cores that would be a little bit softer, more ductile. So as they would forge these pieces, and there's so many different ways from, as you call it, the sanmai steel, or there's so many different, if you Google it, you could see that there was different composite sides, tops, plates. Some would do a very simple forging with a core. Sometimes they made smaller knives. It would be just one style of material. But the better that the smithy could refine this and through their forging and folding techniques would be able to get the best details as possible, especially on the grain structure of the actual side. Not all swords, again, are created equal, and sometimes I've seen swords from good smith, they'd get a secondary polish, an opening would happen, a wear or a kizu, that's the kiss of death, on a blade, and got in an Ono Yoshimitsu one time, spent $30K on it, and it came in, it had a big wear in the side, and I had to return it because that was unexpected. But it does happen, but most of the good swordsmiths out there, if they find a flaw in the steel, they have to start over. They're not going to put it out the door. One particular piece that I really, really like, it's not an old blade, well, they were like late 17th century, but again, I got this one in an auction from Oi Art years ago. And the maker escapes me, but it's pristine. But what's unique is the blade is not only papered, but the carving or the horimono is also papered. As you can see, that horimono goes all the way through the blade. So there's a certificate for the horimono, and there's a certificate for the forging and articulation of the blade. So out of horimono, this is one of my faves. Some smiths could do their own horimono work, but there was guys, craftsmen, who specialized in these sorts of things. And if it was recognized, of course, it would be papered separately. Sometimes some of the swords I have would have a certificate from verifying the maker, verifying the who made the blade, quality, and everything else. And paper, typically a green set of papers is usually a little bit better, is how it would be graded from the sword associations. Would look something along these lines. So this is the paper for the Tadayoshi test cut. And it's important. There's a lot of fake swords out there are fake signatures. You know, they did the same shit back then as if you had a super popular maker. Sometimes guys would try to emulate their work and forge their signature on, but the polishers knew. You know, that's why the cleaning of the sword, you never clean the tang, because that patina that builds up over that really rich, dark surface, chocolate surface, cannot be replicated so easily. Sometimes if a good sword was made and it had a bad signature on it, it is acceptable for a polisher to take it off and repatina the tang, and it's called mume, no signature. It'd be better to have no signature on a blade that came from a specific school than to have a very good blade but a fake signature on it. It's frowned upon. A lot of people often wonder, you know, how all these blades became apparent all over the United States and globally. How did they make their ways out of Japan? From World War II. You know, we know when during the Japanese surrender, you know, the United States went back in there, of course, to occupy, but also to rebuild Japan. And one name specifically comes to mind, and that's MacArthur. So what I understand from what I've read is during that wartime, of course, the emperor at the time said, hey, look, everybody's making swords. Some guy said, look, I'll make you swords, but I can make you maybe 1 or 2 a month, and that's it. This is my quality, this is my speed. So some stuff was made in arsenals, which is the typical gunto mount type shit, and it was very crudely made, but it was functional enough. Sometimes officer swords, or guys that got sent off to war, it was very, very apparent. It's like, oh, geez, you know, little Johnny's got to go off to war. Well, you know, let's give him Grandpa's sword on his way out the door. So sometimes if you find these gunto swords, especially at pawn shops or wherever, you got to know what you're looking at the blade. Just because you get it and just go, wow, look at this Japanese sword and it was arsenal made. It's junk, dude. It's a couple $100 piece. But sometimes Grandpa's blade made it into naval mounts or made it into army mounts or things along those lines, and it could be a blade that was worth or valued at a significant amount. So, and at the time, yes, current smiths in the 40s, you had guys that were just made stuff that was just out of this world, and then other guys just banged out shit to bang it out. So, and it was the same time. During the peaceful times of Japan is when you've seen a lot of the detail, a lot of flamboyancy in the fittings, a lot of beautiful, beautiful polishing, a lot of beautiful work and advancements and that sort of thing. You know, when everybody's rushing to get weapons done to go fight wars, I'm sure everybody pushed. But there were some makers that just said, look it, I don't care. This is who I am, and if you're not happy with that, then you're gonna have to make me either take my life or penalize me or whatever, but I can only make so many.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored.
During the occupying of Japan, or their surrendering and the rebuilding, MacArthur was convinced by a family, the Honami family. So Honami family goes way back in history as far as the authority on polishing and appraising blades. So that family still existed, and while they were trying to destroy the armories, destroy the swords, didn't matter, rifles, guns, machine guns, big artillery factories, dismantling the arms factories, saying to Japan, you're never going to have a standing army ever again, and we're going to destroy all this shit. Blowing up stuff in Tokyo Bay, bulldozing swords into Tokyo Bay, burning them. They're like, stop, stop, stop. Just please, just for a minute, just let's talk about this craft. And they talked to MacArthur about the swords and the fittings and the things along these lines and said, look, this is a lineage that goes way, way, way beyond weaponry. You know, the shrines, this, that, everything else, and just, we want to be able to not lose this craft if we can. They caught MacArthur's ear and he said, okay, explain. Well, we want to be able to continue to preserve this craft going forward if we could regulate it. And it's like, okay, we get it. The difference between armory made stuff and junk. Basically, MacArthur was convinced not to stop destroying the swords, stop destroying this art, but he did not allow the Japanese to keep it. He said, you will preserve it, but we're going to let our guys take them home, okay? Or we're going to let occupying forces take them home. Japanese were like, hey, we're good with that. As long as they exist in this world and they're not being destroyed, they were very acceptable to that. Now going forward, that's why even today, if you're going to become a Japanese swordsmith in Japan, you are registered with that country's, just like you would here, register as a gun dealer or register or something along those lines. So even if you could qualify to make swords, it's still under regulation. Anytime I buy a sword from Japan, I have to get clearance for that to come here. If I send one back to get work done, I have to do the same thing going in. So the government always knows if they're coming and going. If they're arsenal-made blades or that type of shit and you send it back to Japan, they're gonna snap it in half, it's going in the trash. But if it's cultural art, some of it will be allowed to be restored properly. So that's why, again, if you're sending something back to Japan, you better be working with a purveyor stateside that's very reputable, Mike Yamasaki being probably one of the only ones that I go to anymore, and could get the work done and get it done properly and you not lose your shit. So that's how that kind of came about. So I believe that a swordsmith today is only allowed, if they could even make them and sell them, maybe 2 swords a month. Because they talk to all the best makers to say, okay, well, what's a good number? And the good guys came up and said, hey man, if I, even on my best month, on my best quality, maybe 2 swords a month, maybe. Smaller ones, maybe 3, Then there was a provision for smaller blades. And correct me if my numbers are incorrect, but I believe that that is still true as of today. So the whole idea is the Hanami family wanted to be able to preserve this craft going forward. And it's unfortunate that even today, here we are, 2025, is there a lot of new youth interested in making this type of old world craft? Unfortunately, it's not. Even in my industry, I see this all too often. I get a lot of, I've mentored a lot of knife makers. Even I was mentored as a young man, but I progressed my skill levels and continue to absorb the criticism and continue to absorb the hard training. And it's still, for me today, even though that I'm going to say at 55 years old, I'm at the top of my game, I am learning something new every day. Even when I get in here and I study these swords, I see something new. I read, I watch these other makers, I learn new techniques. Even Yoshindo said, can he sit down and make the blade with the 2 guys with the hammers, bonging on the frickin' thing and doing all this shit the old school? But Yoshindo's like, yeah, that's great, I could do that, but I am gonna use an electric hammer to forge out this piece. And a lot of people ran some scrutiny against Yoshindo for that, but he's like, okay, wait a minute now. Could I do it the old way? Yes. Could I polish my own blade? Yes, I can. His thing was that I'm gonna take a little bit advantage of some of the modern equipment. Rather than sitting on a stone doing the roughing work, if I could rough it out on a Burr King, he'll do that. He'll still go through the polishers and everything else. But the whole idea is that if you have that same essence to be able to do this forging properly and do all these things, but you could take advantage of a little bit of technologies, then you should be able to do it. It's just like me. A lot of people scrutinize, like, well, Marfione can make this because he has all this equipment. That's great, but I could still make a knife totally by hand. I could still go to your shop and make my quality in your shop, but can you make my quality in my shop or vice versa? Who knows? We all have our different idea of what the quality is. So my style has been my style for quite some time. Yes, there has been some influence, not only from Japanese makers, and as I'll cover in a different edition, I'll talk about some of the knife makers that have inspired me over the years. But it's like anything else. You got guys who make really great stuff that'll live the legacy. There's, like I said, blades in my collection from the 1300s that look as beautiful as the day that they were made. And I've actually seen some blades that are pretty shitty. So there's a few makers throughout the Japanese history that I admire because of the style and the work and the craftsmanship. I have a couple of the makers throughout history that I absolutely adore. And, but I also have one specific polisher, is the late Hanami Nishu. I have 2 of his works here. He was regarded as one of the best polishers in known history, at least to me. So the 2 of pieces I have are roughly approximately 35 years apart at the time, and I'll show you. So this Tachi, again curated from Mike Yamasaki-san. This belonged to the #2 man at Komatsu Tractor. And it was polished by Honami Nishu, and it is in pristine condition. It's if you sit down and look at the work and look at the grain of the steel, yes, the swordsmith, I can't remember off the top of my head, did an unbelievable job. Because think about it, the sword polisher can get even in the worst blade and make it look very good, but not the vice versa. If you have a perfect made blade and you get a polisher that don't know what they're doing, they can make the blade look horrible. And that's evident in the work that we do even today as a knife maker. I got guys that use wonderful, wonderful steels, but they can't grind a blade worth of shit, nor could they polish it. So, I mean that. Honami Nishu, the late Honami Nishu, national living treasure at the time. You could look down the plane of this blade and it looks like a sheet of glass, like looking across the still pond. You look into the Hamon and I see like the sun setting on the clouds and the mountains. It's incredible work. The camera will not be able to dictate the level of accuracy that this man did with stones. But not only the polishing, Honami Nishu is regarded as an appraiser of the blades. So polishers typically did not only the polishing of the blade, they did the appraisals, which were again called oshigata, which was a tracing of the blade in its entirety. They just knew the work. They knew the smiths. Those guys had seen enough of it where you could lay out all these blades from all different periods of time, and if they were the best at what they did, that was their life. You could cover the tangs and they could tell you the period. They could tell you about the blade. They could tell you probably likely who made it and the period that it was made. It was just incredible. Very, very fine piece. This piece was acquired through Tim Pepin. Again, polished by Master Honami Nishu. So we got a couple swords, probably the earliest ones in my collection. This one here is a Den Omiya Morishige, and it's dated for right around, the era of about 1368 or so. It's papered, and it is again, in pristine condition. One other particular blade I have is a Wakizashi, again in pristine condition. This one is papered, and the year of the papering is the same time that apparently Christopher Columbus came across the ocean. Beautiful, beautiful walk. The maker I forget, I'll have to look it up. It's been a while, but it's in, again, pristine condition the day it was made. A lot of times on the Shirosai, you'll see what's called a sayagaki, and this one was from Sensei Tanobi. I think I can get that right. If I botch that up, I apologize, but they'll go ahead and put an attribute on here, quality of the blade, the time, kind of verifying it. These teachers were a lot of the ones that made up the association that would grade and paper these swords. So a lot of the pieces you see in my collection will have sayagaki on them as well. Neat piece.